You can talk to Jim during the event. He and his company are one of the fonts of wisdom and knowledge and research that we follow in the smart building industry, so I do urge you to introduce yourself. I'd like to bring up now a panel and our moderator, Matthew Marsden, who will introduce himself and his panel, and this is on the return of investment in the smart building.
Thanks. Bring gadgets. It's a sharing situation. Exactly. Super. All right, let's start. Good morning, everyone. So, in this panel, we have assembled the A-team of straight talking when it comes to all things return on investment for smart buildings. I'm Matthew Musson, Managing Director of Technology Advisory at JLL. And this is the crew. Cameron, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. I'm Karen Warner. I'm the UK IMEA Smart Building Lead at Arup.
Michael Grant, COO and co-founder of Metricus.
I'm Paladinson, CEO and co-founder of Ubiquitsense.
Super. All right, without further ado, let's start off then with the first question and to the very heart of the issue. Do smart buildings actually increase the value of a building? Who would like to take that?
I can go. I think it depends on who you are, and we've had the conversations earlier about building the building, getting a tenant in and flipping it. So some of those building owners or building developers, as Jim said, care about one part of that spectrum on the board and others that don't. I think companies like Oxford Properties and OMARS are looking at the full life cycle and they want to try and push the return on investment. But as a landlord, there's a different ROI to a tenant. A tenant ROI may not please the landlord. So before COVID, everyone had too much space. Everyone knew they had too much space, but COVID, back to work, or back to the office, can't call it back to work, don't slate me people. Everyone works from wherever they want. But back to the office, yeah. If you can understand how your space is being used by people daily, you as a tenant occupier can drive a big ROI very quickly by pulling data from your building, not just about the occupancy, but about the energy usage, the BMS based on the amount of people. So there is an ROI there, but it's a different ROI to the landlord ROI, which I think is becoming harder and harder to achieve because you have to have more and more benefits for the people that are going to come and use your building, if it's a different type of building to commercial real estate, but if we stay on commercial real estate, how are you going to attract tenants? How are you going to keep the current tenants? And I think the landlord side of that, they all need to be much more proactive than they've ever been to help drive an ROI for themselves and for their tenants. I think it needs to be done together now. Then there's your building, there's your 10 floors you've taken, Matt. Go and knock your socks off, do whatever you want, it's your 10 floors. I think doing it together we'll see an ROI. But there's ROI to be gained from all of those areas. You've just got to focus on it and use the right data to drive it out.
Okay. So there is value, but it's different depending on who you are.
Correct, yeah.
I would say it potentially depends on how competitive the market is that you're operating in there. If it's a very competitive market, then tenants are going to be looking for the best space for their staff. A big driver for tenants is attraction and retention of the best talent. So therefore they want to provide the best space for their staff. So in a competitive market, it might not mean an increase in value, it might mean a decrease in value or an inability to let. So it's something to be considered.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what Michael was saying is that for the tenants, it's a totally different game on this side of COVID than before, right? Because before COVID, you could basically have a layout with open offices and some meeting rooms thrown in, and people were expected to come to the office 5 days a week, and they would have to fit into that. That doesn't work anymore. You can't force people back. And so you need to cater to the needs of the people. We're engaged in a project with a large industrial company in Germany, and they realized that during COVID, filing of IP of that particular very big company dropped dramatically, and they attribute that to the lack of people, people not coming to the office. So they're obviously really keen to get people back. They can't force them. If you do it at Amazon, there'll be a walkout. I don't know how that works in Germany, but you need to really adapt your space to what people need and want, and what makes them want to go through the extra effort of actually coming into the office. So there's a huge return on investment there. And then how do you fit that in with the landlords? We're seeing projects now in Copenhagen where landlords are starting to put in some of the smart technology, because they understand that in order to cater to the needs of the tenants, again, they have to have that technology themselves and be proactive in using that technology.
Amazing. I think I agree with you all that there's definitely an increase in value. I think it's certainly more clearly articulated for an occupier than it is an investor or a developer. And my rule of thumb for it is that for every dollar that you invest in technology, I think a business can get a $3 return over a 5-year window in some of the business improvements that they unlock from, if it's things to do with sustainability, how they manage their space, or even what happens with some of the kind of human-centric outcomes. I'm really interested, though, in Karen, in what you were saying around the sort of need for an investor or a developer to go for some of this technology. It makes me think, so if we take the situation of ESG at the moment, a lot of investors in properties are concerned that the performance of their building won't meet a future state regulation, and effectively mean that their asset, the term that they use is stranded, in that it's a thing that's there but nobody can buy it or use it because it doesn't meet some kind of requirement. Do you think there will be a sort of expectation in technology that a building would be stranded by public opinion almost?
I do, and I think that buildings can be stranded because the staff in businesses don't want to work for that business because they don't support ESG, or the building that they are working in is not efficient, it's not conducive. So I think it's a huge consideration, and more investment companies are looking at ESG and actually considering those in terms of when they're looking to acquire an asset. So it's a really huge consideration. And if I look at my own company, for instance, one of the things that most of us hold dear to our heart is sustainability. So if we weren't looking at how we optimize our estate, then our staff would have a lot to say about it, and there would be mutiny, I think. So it's a huge consideration for investors and all businesses across the board.
Yeah, we work with tenant occupiers and building owners and developers, and the building owners and developers that are working with us, I think, are leading the market. There will be the Luddites, there will be the ones that only change when they really need to. But the ones that are changing, a couple of examples: Oxford Properties, Omar's, For Partnership in the UK, Basil, I'm not sure if people know him, but leads with ESG. The new building they're building in London, just near Tower Bridge, has some of the steel beams are from the 1960s, 1950s, and even older, but they've been tested, they're being reused. Everything they do and putting into that building is about ESG. But also, they're putting technology in to help the tenants who take space. They will offer them the solution to say, we'll let you know, we'll give you the tools to help you count the amount of people in your floors, because if you take 5 floors, we want you to know that you need 5 floors, and if you don't, the data will be there to inform you what you do at your lease break. So he's being proactive in saying, I'll give you the data, rather than them just say, right, we're going to leave at the end because we know we don't need that space. He's giving them the information. He's doing things about indoor air quality. He's doing things about sustainability. He's giving them data that they need. As soon as they move in, he's saying, as part of your package, you will get this data. Whether you use it or not is up to you, but it'll be in hand, it'll be in there in reports, your facilities team can use it, your workplace team can use it. That, I think, is hugely important. I think more and more of that needs to be done, and I think you need to tie it in with as Karen was saying, ESG, sustainability, data, and value back, whether it's the tenants, people using the space, or the landlord.
So, and I would say that, you know, we really have to think about how can we use technology to retrofit buildings so that we don't have to build as much new as we do, right? Because I think there's some statistics saying that 85% of the buildings that we need by 2050 we already have, right? And so we have an issue with some of them not being energy efficient. We have to do something about that rather than building new buildings all the time. And so how can we put the technology to benefit to make sure we can retrofit those buildings and make them more energy efficient, you know, whether by occupancy analytics, so we don't use energy where there's no people, or, you know, a lot of new smart technology. There's so many examples of projects we've been involved in where, you know, energy consumption is measured and there's no correlation with, you know, the utilization of the building, right? You know, you just turn on the heating in the building by 6 a.m. in the morning, but it's already 23 degrees in there, and then it becomes 25 degrees because you give it a little kick at 7 to make sure it's hot when people come in. And the examples I led you around this, you know, there's so many things that can be done to make existing buildings much more efficient by means of smart technology. And I think there's a huge untapped return on investment in that as well.
Some of the numbers that I see are absolutely horrifying. If you take the sort of energy usage intensities work that the Letty's been doing, I think a sort of best-in-class operational carbon EUI is like 110 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. There is a building in Canary Wharf that's north of 500. It's got to be better to just take the glass off, I think. Cameron?
I think one of the, you were talking about making existing buildings more efficient, and I think one of the earlier speakers talked about, you know, the savings if you optimise the building. Part of my work prior to moving into this field was around building performance, building optimisation, and what we found was if you sat at a BMS screen for a day and looked at it and worked out what was going wrong, you could save 30-35%, a huge amount. Of course, if you walk away within a month, it's back to being in the same mess because people have fiddled with set points and things are failing and things are being moved into hand. So it needs to be constantly monitored. And one of the things that we did on our headquarters building in London was we have indoor air quality sensors, we have people counters so that we can monitor space utilisation, and we're monitoring all of the energy there. And we actually managed to make quite great savings in the energy consumption in that building, which means that when we move to heat pumps, we electrify the building, actually we can size them appropriately. So we're not thinking, the electricity supply into the building's not big enough for all my heat pumps. So, you know, you need to get that down first and then think about the other measures that you might take.
And you probably need technology to even know that.
Absolutely.
I'll just add one thing to
Yeah.
the elephant in the room might be the FMs that manage these buildings, right? And I know you work for one.
I have no comment.
But the inefficiencies of the building automation system or the building management system, depending on which country you call them one or the other, they are maintained sometimes by drive-by maintenance. So buildings leave their lights on. I have a campaign which people love or hate is turn your bloody lights off. But starting at that level, you turn your lights off, there's a saving. I know it's small, but it starts. But the people who are maintaining those building management systems, is it in their contract to say, let's make it smarter or not? Let's help reduce the energy costs. Because if it's not, are they incentivized to do so? They all should.
Yeah.
But do they do that or not?
No.
Probably not.
Exactly. What is the best?
Just on that, I've seen those incentivized schemes.
Yeah, they're good ones.
And,
they really work.
You know,
I've seen one work. I've seen one for a big bank.
I've seen one where the maintenance contractor was contracted to make energy savings of 5% year on year. So there was absolutely zero incentive to make that big impact in the first year. So they can be counterproductive as well.
If I may add an even more scary example, so we had this one project where we measured energy and we measured utilization with the tenant, and then we fed that information back to the landlord, saying you might want to turn down the heat, turn it on later in the morning, things like that. And they're like, yeah, but people might complain if we do something. We'll just leave it like that because then we don't get any complaints. And that to me is really, really scary in the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
It is. Right, it's not an energy panel, so we've got to move on. One thing that I think people struggle with when they are trying to work out like what their return on investment is for a building is they look at the building, and because it doesn't have a label, how do you know what's on the inside? Like, how are you finding that people are articulating the smartness of the building and therefore what like the promise might be that they'll get from the inside? I suppose a bit like if you've got a tin and it doesn't have a label, how do you know what you're going to get? Is it beans? Is it soup? Is it worse? I'll start with you. That's okay.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that's where fragmentation that we're currently seeing is a big issue, right? Because you have things like smart score and smart building certifications that will help some of that. But I think that there needs to be a lot more awareness around, what makes a building truly smart, what's going on there. So yeah, I think standardization will help certainly some of those things that we're currently seeing. But I think it's tricky at the moment.
I can talk about it, but some people might not like what I'm.
Go for it.
I think smart score itself is a point in time. So technology doesn't really change. And I think Jim was talking about it in his talk earlier. When you stick Wi-Fi in a building or you stick 5G in a building, that doesn't change. So yes, you can go and get your badge for 2015, 20, 21, 22. That doesn't really change unless you really enhance your building. I think more needs to be done around certifications that they can be tracked on an ongoing basis, because you can get the one-offs. That's why people are moving from BREEAM to neighbours and all these other things. That is an ongoing with real-time information. If it's something that's tracked and you go from gold to bronze because your building, performance went down, that's okay. But if you built your building and finished it and flipped it in 2020, the badge stays there, but you have no idea what the performance is of that building now, because it was a point in time, whether it was at design phase or handover phase. Think indoor air quality. Indoor air quality, as we've all mentioned, in some way, shape or form, changes over the seasons and changes throughout the day with the amount of people in it. So having something that actually does a performance measure continuously, whether it's quarterly or half yearly or whatever that might be, I think that's the important part of something that moves with the building. If the building changes, your score changes, and obviously you want to keep it as high as possible, or if you've started here, get to here. But I think the point in time and the single point certifications aren't adding any real value to the market or to the people in the buildings.
I agree. And I'm not sure if any of the buildings that I've followed up with that have been for their badge process can tell me that there's been a marked improvement in what they were expecting anyway. But difficult to prove.
It actually doesn't tell you what they've targeted, though, if it's bronze or it's gold. So it still doesn't tell you exactly what the building does. And actually the way that we realise use cases can be slightly different from building to building. Maybe we need something like that written in, something like a building user guide. We did those years ago so that people understood how they interacted with their building and sort of demystified it. So maybe there needs to be a smart section in a building user guide that easily describes what the building does.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to flip that, right? We need to make it human-centric rather than building user guide tells a user how to use a building, because it will build, designed for purpose.
But the building user guide was intended to be a guide for people using the building, lay people, non-technical. So it's just this is how your lifts work.
Yeah.
This is how you go in with your phone. We're monitoring space. These things on the ceiling are monitoring space. This is what space utilization. This is what we're doing with it. I'm sure we could lay it out in simple terms.
I think so. And everyone's got a different idea of what a smart building is, if that is like HAL 9000 in the Space Odyssey and it's going to kill you because it's locked you outside, or even stupid stuff that I used to get at one of the buildings. Oh, Matt, the toilet smells. I thought this was a smart building. Yeah, it doesn't have smell-o-vision though, does it? Like, that's you dirty cow. Did you have something to add? Sorry.
No, it's just because smart building, it all comes from our technology background, right? Maybe we should invent a new term saying user-centric building. How do we design user-centric buildings? Because that's going to work with, that's what will work with the millennials, right? They're not going to come to the office 40 hours a week if the technology doesn't, support their requirements in the building, right? I think we have to look at it differently. We're all roughly the same age. I'm probably the oldest, but anyway, we're used to going to the office that has technology, but we need to flip the coin and see, how do we adapt the offices, the spaces to the millennials, because they're not going to come in if it doesn't meet their requirements for ESG and their ways of working.
Now, let's put our CFO hat on. Companies that want to go ahead and make retrofit, build from scratch their smart building, where do they get their case studies or data from to help them know if they're making a good investment in this sort of technology? Where do you take your clients?
I can answer. As a pure software as a service business, we provide the data. We do analyse the data sometimes for some of our customers, but we're not going to tell you things up here I don't think that you already know, but if you don't, the use case and the requirements. But if you're a bank, you're really good at making money, whether it's on mortgages or FX trading or whatever else you're doing. But do you have the data analyst to put together the information that you need to build the business case to satisfy all the stakeholders to then figure out the ROI that you can drive? Possibly not. Maybe someone like an Accenture or an Avanade to help start the process. Because if you're starting from scratch and you've never done it, it's quite a heavy lift. And if people that have done it before, like yourself, Matt, when prior life and you're still doing it, is the heavy lift you should not try and do yourself if someone else can help you. They might not need to help you all the way through the process, but to get started, get someone who has done it before, get someone who has helped others, and understand your use case and your requirements. Always do that up front, of course, but then get someone to help you with the main key areas and figure out what the real drivers are for you as a business. From a bank, you want to make money. You want someone else to tell you how much money you can save in buildings, how much space you need, how much energy you could save. Get someone who's done it before, not try and learn the whole thing yourself. If you need to learn it yourself, then you need to go on an education program before you even start trying to do that, something like Smart Buildings Bootcamp, if that's what you want to do. And you should probably do that through the process anyway to stay in touch with the people that are helping you. But you don't have to try and do all the heavy lifting yourself. I'm still not allowed to use a washing machine at home. I don't bother anymore.
Paddy, did you have something
to add? It's really, CFOs are all about numbers, right? So we can take an example of a insurance company in the Benelux area where, we started a project with them and they said, yeah, we think we're doing pretty poorly. We think we're around 50% occupancy. We measured them for 3 months and they were at 17% occupancy. I think that for a CFO, is a pretty staggering number that shows him that, well, instead of building a new building, I might just fit in at least twice as many people in this building and save a lot of money. So that's a very basic return on investment showcase. And I think to what Michael says, it's all about the actionable insights, right? It's not about providing vast amounts of data. That's a bit old hat. You need those actionable insights that will make it really easy to make those decisions.
Exactly. We spoke about this a bit this morning when we said if somebody does like a good project that has got some great data where it's proven a return on investment, all of a sudden it's a secret. Why do you think that is?
Well, then all the competitors would be doing the same, wouldn't they? I don't know. It's quite difficult to get hold of really good data. Obviously, the clients have started rolling that out across their portfolio can use the insights that they've got from the first buildings to justify the next ones. Often companies have some data themselves. If you think about it, if you go through what the use cases are and what your drivers are for going down the route of a smart building, that might be all about staff. It might be all about attracting the best people, keeping them there. I'm sure their HR departments have got lots of data that tells them, on average, this is the cost to recruit and train a new member of staff at whatever grade. So they do have that data. They'll have the data on what their churn is in their organisation. So if they can reduce that at all, they can put a monetary value on it. So sometimes just by looking through those different metrics, they can find that data in their own organisation, and perhaps we can give them examples for clients we've worked with and what the benefits have been for them.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is it's very much hush-hush. You're going to have to ask some people in this room. You're going to have to talk to HR. You're going to have to make some assumptions and hope for the best.
I think part of it, I think part of it is depends on your customer. We've got a few banks as customers, and they don't like to shout their names out, but we anonymise the use cases and we push them out. But I don't know why. It's a strange industry, right, that we work in, all of us in some way, shape or form, that people don't want to shout about that. We've got a public one with Accenture. We have had previous ones with GSK, but a lot of the companies, I think that companies like us and Vanti and others work with, they do great work, but they'll say, just keep that between us. We don't want our name out there. And that's, I think more of it should be done, because then it can help the whole industry, and companies like Vanti and others can then go and help more people. They've got a proven case study. It helps them get more business. It helps them help more companies. It helps drive more ROI, more savings. CFO then becomes happy. But I don't know why it's not shouted about more, because there are some big successes out there from quite a few companies all over the world.
Exactly. Move on to the next issue then. One thing that I am concerned about, as I'm still playing the role of CFO, if I invest in this smart building, won't it become out of date? Like, what do you think the role of obsolescence is in, does it undermine the value of a smart building?
I loved one of the slides from the last speaker where he showed that software gets updated sort of every 6 months or so, but he actually showed that hardware is becoming out of date in 2 to 5 years, and that's very true, and that's in the main due to the advance of software and becoming more and more hungry and putting more processors on boards, etc. So that is actually a challenge. That's a real challenge. If you're working on a very large construction project, some of the hardware can be out of date before you're complete. So for the hockey stick, what we need is some hardware manufacturers to guarantee their hardware for longer, and that would be really good. And I think there are some that are now saying 10 years, which would make it really good. You can update firmware, not a problem at all, but the hardware is an issue, and we need more manufacturers to be addressing it.
That's a good point. I think also coming back to Jim's speech before, the whole standardization, if we can have standardization for the data, real estate core brick scheme of these things, then, you can actually, maybe if some of that hardware is replaced after 5 years because there's a new AI coming out in that sensor, that needs new hardware. But if it's all standardized in the same formats and the data goes into a data lake that belongs to the building and not into the back end of a supply like ours, that where you have to get it from APIs, if you can tap into that standardization, if that can become the norm, then I think there's a way of mitigating that issue of buildings being around for 50 years, but hardware for 5 years, and then the firmware only for 6 months.
I think to get to that point, we need to, bring it down further to the edge, because you can replace a controller, but you have to put a whole new strategy into it, and you have to make sure that that works. If it's segregated down further, then that would be much more possible to do, but then you've got an awful lot more devices to deal with, so swings and roundabouts.
I think the hardware world, if you take two different sides, IT, upgrades almost every year because you can get 3 or 4 more milliseconds faster throughput speeds. Now, if you really care about that as a banker and financial trader, you probably do, but running a smart building, not really. IoT technology, hardware vendors, I think some of the hardware vendors haven't upgraded their hardware for 5 or 6 years, which is quite a good thing in some respects. They can upgrade the firmware, but I think you've got to look at the different pieces of hardware, and I think what needs to happen on the hardware side for all vendors, and I've said this before, but APIs are like toothbrushes. Everyone's got their own, but no one wants to use anyone else's. People need to start to standardize. People need to play nicely together. What is happening in big buildings where we work with 7 or 8 different vendors in a building, APIs are either really good, they're not existent, or they're a bit temperamental. But take Azure and Amazon and Google, you can build microservices architecture, you can put things in a container, and you can drop it anywhere you like. I know that's a little bit harder to do with hardware, but standardizing across gateways, an example, indoor air quality, occupancy, capacity, energy, leak detection, all these others. Some of our biggest customers are saying, I do not want, especially IT, with the headache they have afterwards to maintain it, I don't want 4 different hubs or 4 different gateways connecting thousands of different sensors. Give me one central location, which is why Cisco are doing more and more that they're doing, sticking Ocean and LoRaWAN and everything in their wireless access points so you can get rid of those infrastructure hubs and gateways to make it easier. But I think, making the hardware, as you've said, to last a little bit longer, do the firmware upgrades. The technology advancements aren't that great for what we're talking about in smart buildings. Again, routing and switching, if you're a banker and a trader and you can make that split-second trade, yes. But counting people in and out, monitoring energy, doing leak detection, you don't need to change hardware and devices for that. Maybe some batteries every now and then, but I think standardization across the board is required from an infrastructure perspective to help lower those costs and remove the obsolescence.
Absolutely. Well, my last question before we go to the audience, if the promise of all this smart building stuff is so good, then why has it been so difficult to get it to stick in industry?
Well, let Karen answer that. Given she works for
I think with anything new, there's a reticence to grab it, and you may say it's not new, it's been around for a long time, but every day it's new because it's moving all the time. I think if you go to one of the big hubs like London, there's much more happening there, there's much more money around, so contractors are much more used to it. If you go outside of London, honestly, you will get every obstacle put in your way because people don't understand it. They are worried about the risk to contract program, they're worried about cost, they're worried about not being able to do it. So there's a big learning curve still to go. And I think you talked about standardization. We still don't have standardization. People are doing it very differently. We start from the bottom up and start and make sure that we're dealing with standard asset naming structure, standard point naming structures, standard ways of getting data out of devices. It's being done differently in different areas, so how can you expect people to be comfortable with it when every job's different?
But there's also a fair element of conservatism, right? If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Obviously, if the building is running, no one's complaining.
I would say it is broken.
I totally agree, but coming back to my example, it may be a bit too warm in that building. We may, spend too much energy on it, but people are not really complaining. So let's just let's let the building run as it always has, because nobody's complaining.
Wild.
Anything to add?
I think it's two sides, two areas really. One is people haven't opened up their wallets post-COVID.
Yeah.
And they're trying to see what they really need based on what's happening in the building. I think there's also been a lot of promising and under-delivering in our industry, which is once bitten, twice shy.
Yep.
And I think also that there are a lot of point solutions that people get a little bit of value out of, but then they have to go and do another investment, and trying to build multiple business cases around that makes it really hard. So I think that was 3 things, but There are multiple things, I think, the reasons why. But I do think standardization is one of them, because when you get to the point of connecting up lots of different data sources in buildings, we have to get some standardization. We've talked about that a lot to help people in the buildings get comfortable, whether it's IT or OT, connecting to platforms to give them the data the way they need it.
So a long slog ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for the panel? Oh, here we go. We'll just leave the microphone with you for next time. What's your name and what company are you from?
Hi, sorry, it's me again. It's a fun question this time. For each panel member, if you had a crystal ball that you could peer into right now, when do you think we might get to the position of being able to drop the smart from smart building? Because let's be honest, no one calls it a smartphone anymore, do they?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I've often said that in the future we won't have smart buildings. We'll only have dumb buildings, which are the ones that we didn't bother to run out this technology to. I think in commercial buildings we're getting there. Maybe in the next 5 years. I would say in non-commercial though, there's been a slower uptake, although I am seeing it rolling out into other sectors now. So maybe commercial in 5 years. If I'm optimistic, the rest are a bit to follow.
It'll be the end of this month for us. You must have spoken to my CMO, because we literally are removing it as of this month. It's a conversation we've had many, many times. So from Metrica's perspective, we won't be talking about smart buildings from February 1st.
But I also think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will see change driven by change in user behavior in commercial buildings. Because we, again, as I said, we need to cater to the needs of the users and not the other way around. And I think that will inherently make those buildings so smart that we can remove the smart because it's standard.
Oh, I shouldn't have left the most depressing question till the end. I'm bitter now. Never. And I think it will just change what it means, like there'll be some sort of enhancement to GPT. So it'll be a sentient or a cognitive building rather than smart, or we're all going to fall in love with the Apple Vision Pro and it'll be blended reality buildings or insert other bullshit here. We'll see. Have we got time for one more? If there is one? I did see 2 hands. No, all right, not Braven. Ah, there we go. Bold hand, love it.
He's on his way, he's running across.
Very relaxed, though.
Yeah. Started with a run, became a walk.
Hi. Julie from HereWorks. I suppose this is for everybody. You were talking about the standardization and who do you think should lead the standardization of smart building? And should it be led on a global level or a regional level? And yeah, that's it.
But a quick answer, please.
I don't think it can be any of the vendors, because they'll just tailor it to what they need to get more sales, to help themselves, to help them sell more, to help them, contain their own market. I think it needs to be an independent body. Whether that body exists or not, I don't know. Whether someone can step in and do it, but I think the body needs to be completely independent of hardware and software and vendors globally to make the right decision for everyone, so that no one company benefits more than the other. Because it's the people using the buildings, whether that's the building owner or the building occupier, they need to be the ones that benefit from it, from the simplicity and the standardization.
Any builds?
There actually have been some moves towards this already. We worked with British Land and Google to develop a building device naming standard, but that actually has been taken over by the Open Data Institute, which are completely independent. And I think it does need to have a completely independent body. There are a number of repositories on GitHub, but they're owned by commercial companies. So I think that, yeah, definitely it needs to be an open standard like Open Data Institute or some other.
Super. Thank you very much. Please could you put your hands together for our amazing panel, Pelle, Michael and Cameron.
Matthew, can you stay for 1 second? Because, thank you for doing this job as the moderator and putting the
Cheers.
panel